Hi to all the students and teachers at Park Primary School. My name is Emma and I'm a video game researcher at the University of Cambridge. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about video games and mental well-being. So there are some people, parents, teachers, and even some scientists, who think that playing video games is bad for children. They worry that playing video games might make children more aggressive and violent. They think that playing video games might limit children's creativity and their imaginations. They're concerned that video games shorten children's attention span, and that means they might not do so well in school, or that they might find, reading books very boring in comparison to playing video games. And finally, they also worry that playing video games is a very isolated activity, and that it is replacing meeting up with friends and playing together in person. So you might know somebody who has these types of concerns, and you might have these concerns about video games yourself. But what is the scientific evidence that video games are bad for you? Well, the answer is there isn't very much. Even after more than 30 years of looking into the negative effects of video games on children, scientists haven't actually managed to find any clear, definitive link between gaming and any mental, social, or physical problems. In fact, the most compelling studies on gaming and children have shown that video games can actually have a positive effect on our brains. So playing certain types of video games can actually improve your strategic thinking and how quickly you process information. They can teach reading and mathematics, as well as art and history and physics and geography and other important subjects. Actually, when I was a teacher, some of my students had the most amazing knowledge of historical events because they had played games like Total War or Civilization, or games that were set in World War I or II. So studies haven't found any causal relationships between playing violent video games and aggressive behavior, although people who are more aggressive in real life might feel drawn towards more violent games. But in fact, there are some researchers who think that video games might help people process and release aggressive feelings, a bit like a virtual punch bag, so that it actually makes them less aggressive in real life. While playing some games did result in children spending more time on their own, although in much the same way when you're reading a book, which is technically a solitary activity, but you're not really alone, are you? Because you're with the author and with the characters. And in the case of video games, you're with game designers. But playing other games was found to be actually a really sociable experience for children. So playing games like Fortnite, FIFA, Minecraft, Animal Crossing, or Call of Duty multiplayer, and so on, they actually all increased participants' pro-social skills. So those are things like your ability to work in a team, and your desire to share resources and to help each other out, as well as, learning about healthy competition. So how to be a good winner and a gracious loser, and not somebody who starts screaming and throwing their controller at the screen if things don't go their way. So these games, like FIFA, Animal Crossing, and so on, they actually form the basis of lots of in-person friendships. And researchers found children who, for example, played Minecraft together were much more likely to also play together on the playground when they saw each other in person. And finally, most surveys of children who love video games and play them a lot haven't found that their imaginations are all small and shriveled. Quite the opposite. Lots of video games provide the kinds of rich, imaginative fantasy spaces that send people's imaginations and creativity into overdrive. So if all of our empirical studies are saying that video games do not have a bad effect on children, why is this belief so common? Well, the truth is that anytime there's some sort of change or innovation that relates to communication technology, people do worry about how it will affect younger generations, because the young are seen as more vulnerable, the most vulnerable people in society. It is quite common, I'm afraid, for grown-ups to project some of the worries and anxieties that we have about ourselves onto children. So I'm sorry about that, everybody. So the fact that grown-ups are pretty worried about our own consumption of digital media, and the fact that we can get a bit obsessed with screens and with our phones, the way that gets expressed, the way that we're working through that, is by doing lots of studies on how screens impact children. It's always been this way, I'm afraid to say, throughout history. So did you know for example, that when storybooks were first invented about 300 years ago, people were really worried that if vulnerable people read them, it would corrupt their morals and make them mentally unstable. Does that sound a bit familiar? Obviously, nowadays, most people believe that reading novels is a great way to spend your time. But the opposite was true when novels were first becoming popular. And when your grandparents were children, scientists were very earnestly trying to prove that watching films made children violent and ruined their imaginations and so on. And when your parents were children, researchers were investigating whether listening to rock and roll music would make children into horrible little monsters. Well, most of us nowadays aren't too worried about Madonna and AC/DC and Prince ruining childhoods. And so I think also in time, people will stop worrying so much about video games and children as well. And in fact, I can already see that change happening, as a lot of early career researchers like me, a lot of younger researchers, are now joining in the scientific conversation. And we were the first generation to grow up playing a lot of video games. So we're not afraid of them. And we don't think that video games will turn children into horrible little monsters, at least not all children. That said, there are things in video games I do think are harmful and things we should be aware of. But these aren't things that only happen in video games. They happen across all media, including films, TV shows, novels, and in news reporting. Things like using unfair stereotypes that normalize sexism, racism, homophobia, and ableism, or that glorify war by making it seem like a heroic adventure. If we consume lots of media where these attitudes are made to seem okay, then it can start to affect how we think and how we behave in real life. And then there can be some very bad, sad consequences for people's mental health that, as a result of bullying or discrimination. Now, of course, there are games that do not rely on these boring old stereotypes and that they are brave enough to tackle difficult issues within the game, but there's not enough of games like that. You guys might be the next generation of games designers and developers, whether you're into programming or art design or storytelling. So maybe you will be the ones who produce video games that don't just copy and replicate some of the negative attitudes that we see in films and TV and other media, but actually prove the fact that video games are not just a leap forward in technology. They can also be a leap forward in social thinking and behavior, and in bravery and compassion. Another thing I will quickly add is about video game addiction. Again, we are all, grown-ups included, trying to figure out what is a healthy relationship between us and digital media and our various screens. If you are playing video games so much that it's stopping you from getting a good amount of sleep, that you're not able to keep up with your schoolwork because you're spending so many hours playing Halo or Animal Crossing or whatever it is, then of course that is a problem. Video games can be really compelling. They can keep you coming back, and it can be really hard to tear ourselves away from them sometimes. But we do have to take responsibility for that, and we have to work on self-control and willpower and discipline and knowing how to manage our time and what are reasonable limits. This is definitely not just a problem for children, but for everybody. Everybody needs to learn how to set limits for themselves and how to stick to them. So video games can be an awesome way to spend your downtime, but it is good to have a variety of hobbies and activities that are important to you. And also remember that while most video games are designed to be as amazing as possible because they want to give you, the player, a really cool experience, there are games out there that are designed to be addictive because they want to keep your eyes on the screen while they show you advertisements, which the game developers get paid to show you. Or because they want to lure you into gambling on a loot box or paying for an upgrade or paying for a character in FIFA or something like that. Now, if you're a critical player, if you know a lot about games and you study video games, you'll be able to spot the devices that these games are using to hook you in. So the best thing we can do is to take video games seriously and to educate ourselves and each other about game design so that we are well guarded against any dodgy tricks or techniques. So a little challenge to you before I go. If you know someone who is worried about the effects of video games or who thinks video games are a complete waste of time, why not choose a video game that you think they would like, nothing too tricky, something that's going to be accessible for them, and play it together with them and talk to them about why you like that game and what you think is valuable about it. You might not turn them into gamers, but you might start the process of slowly changing their minds. So good luck and have a great day. Bye.